Hello everyone, Lion Gamer here again. In my last video I talked about the release of a new DBT09 set Dragontree Invasion. And since I also released once a video of a decklist of one of my most favorite decks, Nirvana Jheva, I will once again show you another decklist of Jheva. First, a fun way to build this deck, but in addition, tailor some ways, or better to say tips, to build Nirvana Jheva in a more competitive way, or better to say in a way where you have a higher chance of winning a little tournament at your local. So with no further ado, let's jump right into it. So now here we are, and let's start right off with a right line. First, just your generic right line in this deck. First, the starter, followed by the grade 1 Reno, which allows you to search your deck for up to one Trickster and call it the rear guard. Grade 2 Rayo, which allows you to look at the top 7 cards of your deck and search for a Parade Ring and add it to your hand. And of course, lastly in the right line, your main grade 3 of this deck, Nirvana Jheva herself. Next up, I am playing, of course, which you really want to see in each game, 3 copies of Nirvana Jheva herself, just for persona right targets in your deck. Now following up, the Parade Rings which I use in this deck, I'm using 7. First, 4 copies of the new Parade Ring of DBT10, Stragalio, 2 copies of the good old Brahmada, and lastly 1 copy of Galandai. Of course, there are several number of Parade Rings which you could use in this deck. I decided for 4 copies of Stragalio, not only because it's a new card, but I will show you in a second in the rest of my deck the reason for this specific number. And I'm using Galandite, not just 1 copy of it. I could have, of course, used anything like a third Brahma just to have a more consistency for the Brahmadas for the draw power, but I just wanted to limit the number of counterplays which I really want to dedicate into Parade Rings, and Galandite is still just a no-cost effect Parade Ring which I really would like to see. And now it's gonna get a little bit spicy here because I'm gonna show you the Overdress series which I use in this deck. First, 2 copies of Garo Verena, 2 copies of Braum Verena, 2 copies of Bills Verena, and lastly, 1 copy of Bow Verena. As you can see, a quite low number of crossover series in this deck, which you won't really see in any other Nirvana Jheva deck. And in addition, a very big variety of crossover series, not just dedicated between just 2 or something like that. I'm using every crossover unit which we have right now. That's just my own preference. You can also, of course, just say if you really want to use more of Braum and Bow Verena, or more of a combi of Bills Verena and Garo Verena, just having more shield values in general. This is not really a meta list, as I said at the beginning of the video. This is more like a fun deck which you really want to try out if you also like Nirvana Jheva like I do. Just having guard hate, a big shield, a big beater in this deck, and of course just a weird tech maybe for you all, but just a better way to really target one opponent really to retire and not hoping for the hit of Braum Verena. But also just for this 1 counterblast, 1 drive is also quite nice to have. So of course, as we've seen, quite a low number of crossover dressers, but the reason for that is because I'm playing also 4 Overdress units in this deck. And it's gonna be quite weird for you now, but I'm gonna tell you why I'm doing this here. So first, 1 copy of Verena Valiente, 1 copy of Verena Expector, and then lastly, 2 copies of Verena Arcs. Okay, Verena Arcs is not that surprising. It's just a Overdress unit which allows you to counterblast 1 and draw 2. But here comes the thing. I'm playing 1 each of some different Overdress units, but why am I doing this? There's a pretty interesting thing which you can do, and that's why I'm playing 4 copies of Stragalio. Stragalio has the ability which allows you to place it from your hand, you dish 1 card from your hand, and search your deck for either 1 Trickster or a card with an Overdress ability and add it to your hand and shuffle your deck. You don't go minus on this, and you can just fetch almost anything if you want, like Very Arcs just as a draw power, or one of these 2. And after I've played this deck list, I have most of the time come into this situation where I have multiple Stragalios in my hands, like 2 or 3, so I've used his skill 2 times in a row in the turn, just to fetch if I already have a Trickster on the board or a very Axe, the Overdress state, just both of these out, and what happened then? Yeah, we will see. I just overdressed Valiant first on top of Vanguard Arcs in the cross overdress state, and also Verena Expect on top of it, which allows him to have, if you do the math, a 28 buff, meaning you got a 41 Verena Expector standing alone, also 41k on the opponent's turn. If you really gotta try it, it's really funny to have a 41 beater on board without having to use from Marina or anything like that. Even despite having a draw power, those are quite exceptional for themselves as well. Like Valianta having an on-hit ability on itself is quite impressive by itself, but if you don't want to go this route, you can just really go into Expector and have a 15k and crit +1 buff on this attack. Of course, you really will only want to use Verena Expector at the moment where you really know you won't be able to guard it. So yeah, I'm only playing 4 Overdress units because the places were quite tight in this deck, and because we have access to Strike Alley now, it's not really that much of a problem having a low Overdress unit count. And for all of you who don't really like this part of it, like me having 2 one-offs, you can just go for a full playset of Variant Arcs and have a consistent counter +1 draw 2 power in this deck. Moving on, I'm playing 3 Tricksters. Now, this might be also a weird moment, because you might have expected someone who plays only 3 Tricksters in this main deck to have 1 Trickster as a starter instead. But the reason for it is like why I play a low number of Overdress units in this deck. I had the tight space, but yeah, Trickster is still really the important key in this deck, and you should play more. But once again, because of Stragalio, this is not really necessary. Lastly, I'm playing 2 copies of a new order of DBT10, Clad in Prayer. That's the whole big reason why I'm playing 2 dresses ability in this deck, because Clad in Prayer forces you to have 2 units on board and each being in an Overdress and cross Overdress state. The unit in the Overdress state gains the ability once per turn. If your Vanguard attacks, you can stand this unit, and the unit in the cross Overdress state gains 10k until the end of turn. So really short, thus I can demonstrate you. So for example, if you got maybe like the Expector wombo combo which I have explained before, like if you got the whole stack, Trickster, Arcs, Valiant and Expector on the board, and then for example like any of these, like let's say Garavarina, and you of course maybe if you have the option Galadite, which buffs Garavarina even further, you got first 41 Expector swing twice, and even having the potential to be on the 56 attack on the second time. And in addition to that, you got a Garavarina of 40k if you crossover dressed him with Galadite, which will swing twice as well because of your Nirvana Jheva, where your opponent has to use 2 cards on each attack. As you can see, it's just way too amazing, right? Of course, a coin flip moment where you say it's swinging in and then I will win in this turn or not. This is really just more of a fun thing to do in my deck. You don't really have to copy me to say, yeah, this is a great order, you can just go in and use both of them. You don't have to be me, of course. It's just that I really like this order a lot. It's quite a funny gimmick for Nirvana Jheva, you know. You don't have to be me. If you don't like this, you can just put them away and just go for more crossover dress units. There's nothing really much more to say, just as you know in many of the decks, 3 perfect guards and followed by the blitz order. Nothing special about this. And lastly, about my trigger line. This might be another big surprise for you all, because what most of you guys have seen might be a full set of crits and only one other type of trigger like a draw or front. But what I'm doing here is I'm playing first 6 crits and a combi of 3 draws and 2 fronts. And the rest, yeah, of course, 4 heals and 1 over trigger. Putting that aside, what I really want to talk about here is the trigger lineup. The trigger lineup is quite interesting in that state that you see me here using all 3 of them. Some of them might say now, hey, why do you do? You should just use these 2 fronts and go for 8 crit. Or just say maybe don't use draws anymore, just for, again, like before, 2 crits and 3 fronts. But hear me out, crits are important. That's not a lie. First, why I'm using fronts? If it comes up as a trigger, it's a huge power buff for the last 2 attacks, and if you're in return, like I've demonstrated before with Clad and Praise Order, this is just a huge power swing which your opponent can't really got or has to use his whole hand just to survive, and the shield value of 20k is really important. There have always been a time where 20k shield on one card has been important in quite many scenarios, so don't sleep on it. And the reason why I'm playing draws as well, why I really wish to have some kind of defensive and offensive option in the triggers. I really also wanted to have more draws in this deck. Like, okay, I already gotten a lot of draws because of Arena Arcs and fetching something out with Stragalio, but I really want to have more cards in my hand to pitch for the cause of Stragalio himself. Then of course, before I done this lineup, I'll have already tested like most likely only crits and draws or like only crits and fronts, but in most of my test plays, I really have wished in both of those scenarios to have the other trigger as well. So that's why I've tried to come up with some kind of balanced amount of triggers of all 3 of them, and it ended in the decision to see if I want to play more draws or more fronts. I have to say for more draws because just for the much draw power in this deck. The trigger lineup is just what I use, it's my own preference, and I'm not saying that you have to use it like this. So it's really up to you how you want to use the trigger lineup in this deck. So yeah, that's it for my deck list, but what I really want to talk about in this one is, despite the fact that I'm playing most of a fun version of Nirvana Jheva right now, is for all of you who want to play the more serious variant, I'm gonna test something about this. First of all, just put the 2 Clad prayers out. Like, this is just a gimmick if you really want to be like Yui himself in the anime and use this order. But really, yeah, get rid of this order, just put them out. Don't really need it. So yeah, then the next question comes out, what do you want to play instead of those 2? First off, right off, 1 place goes in for Trickster. And the second one goes crossover, choose which you want to use. And then the next thing, of course, if you get rid of the Clad and Prayer, you can also get rid of these 2 one-offs which I'm using right now, like the Valiente Expector, just put them out as well. In that case, you can decide in this case to either go for Arena Arcs, or in my opinion, just go for free, due to the reason that you got the amazing Prayer Dragon Stragalio, which allows you to fetch your deck for either the Trickster or Very Arcs. With that in mind, you could also say that you only play 3 of each, 3 of Trickster and 3 of Very Arcs. So moving on, of course, if you will, like I said, get rid of those cards and put more Overdress units in this deck, there's some quite interesting variants you can go for. Going crazy, concentrate on Brawn and Bow of Arena. Of course, this variant costs you more, kind of less than before, but this is also more a deck which concentrates to clear for your opponent's board. If you go going for this route, I would really recommend you to play the 1 Grey 1 Prayer Dragon, which has the ability, if this unit becomes a original dress, if your soul has nothing in it, you can search 2 perfect way to get cards in your soul to use Baroness effect or even Brown Baroness. But if you are not really feeling like using more counterplays just to use Barbarina, or really rely on having a quite number of souls because of these 2, you can also concentrate more on Bills and Garov Arena. It's more of a long-term based game because you got now most of the times a 15k interceptor which can be targeted to the opponent. And second of all, it's also defensive that since these 2 have a power buff even during the opponent's turns, so it's really harder for your opponent to get rid of them. In addition to that, Garov Arena is odd restriction that your opponent is forced to use 2 cards in the hand at the same time. It's quite effective. But yeah, this is more like of a long-term base if you really like that more than this full power like variant. But there are also some other variants, of course. You don't really have to go and say like I'm only using grade 2s or only grade 3s and flash Arena and combine it with one of these 2 grade 3s. He's so versatile that you can always use him in any Nirvana Jheva deck, even in the future. But ultimately, it's really up to you which crossovers you really want to use. The question is, what kind of style like? Going more of a guard restriction route, or just going for rear guard drive check pressure, or also just a big high beater, or being more defensive and going for the long term of game. Or you can do it like me and go for a mixed version of it, just abusing any kind of it, decide on the situation and not being forced on one style. And it's most of the time my kind of way of playing Nirvana Jheva, having access to more options than being forced to be in a single way of it. That's how I look of it. If you want to go for a more serious way of it, that's it for the video. I hope you enjoyed my deck list and my thoughts of Nirvana Jheva right now. Leave a like on this video and even a comment below if you have some of your own opinions about the current Nirvana Jheva builds which you see or which you have come up with. And I hope I will see you next time. Bye!